Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fantasy Life's 2024 team preview of the Dallas Cowboys. Inside, you're going to find three most interesting things you need to know about this squad. We'll get into the offensive philosophy, what the betting markets think of the 2024 Cowboys, the sleeper to target in your drafts, the position battle that most needs monitoring, beat writers to follow, who we think the Cowboys would be if they were a TV or a movie character, all that and so much more. So give us 30 minutes. We'll get you truly acquainted with the Dallas Cowboys. And to do just that, I am joined by Fantasy Life Director of Analytics / all-around baller, Dwain The Rock McFarland. Dwain, it is team preview season, and we are starting off with the reigning NFC East champions, but new year, new Cowboys. So let's kick things off with the three most interesting things about this team, starting with the reality that Dak Prescott might just be looking at his worst supporting cast since the first half of 2018. That was pre-Amari Cooper. You know, we can talk about maybe, what he was doing in 2022 and everything like that, but it's not great. But Dak has been pretty damn great in fantasy land. So what do you think gives here, Dwain? Can Dak continue to post QB1 numbers in fantasy ahead of 2024?
Yeah, I thought this was a really good question by you, because I started thinking back to that offense, and I think Gallup was the wide receiver one, like you mentioned, before they got Ceedee Lamb. But like going back and looking at it, like Amari versus Lamb, give me Lamb. We've got Lamb now. We've got Schultz versus Ferguson. I think that's a push. You've got Michael Gallup versus Cooks. Don't really like either one of them. Probably a push. Then you've got Jalen Tolbert versus a Cedric Wilson, Noah Brown. That's probably also a push. I think the biggest difference is the fact that you had a younger version of Zeke back then, Pollard. Now you've got old Zeke and Dowdle. So, but it's at the position where you could probably give the most. At least that's what the analytics nerds would tell you. So I think the biggest question is probably the offensive line. Go to Tyler Guyton this year of the first round. Tyron Smith moves on. Brock Hoffman at center battling Cooper Beebe, their third round pick. You got Tyler Biadasz moving on. So, I mean, I think as long as those guys work out, you added Tyler Smith in the first round of 2022. I think you're probably fine. But I think the offensive line is the biggest question, but at least they have invested. And so I feel like if some of those picks work out, then it's going to be fine for the Cowboys.
I believe it was Tom Brady in one of his many media interviews that he's been doing recently, talking about how, there's just such a shortage of actually good offensive line coaches. And to the Cowboys' credit, while they have had guys like Tyron Smith, obviously now on the Jets, but in and out of the lineup, the O-line has continued to be fairly elite over the years. So kudos to them for doing that. And accordingly, the offense has been pretty freaking good as long as Dak has been healthy. I mean, since 2019, we're talking about the 6th ranked scoring offense, the second pre-Dak injury, the first post-Dak injury, and then in 2023, yes, this is your league's reigning number 1 ranked scoring offense. So accordingly, Dwayne, Dak has been scoring fantasy points with the best of them. I mean, only Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Patrick Mahomes have more fantasy points per game than Dak since 2019. So when we look at it again, relative lack of offensive weapons. Again, guys like CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow, Tua, Goff, Purdy. I think we can agree they're probably existing with better supporting cast. But for you, Dwayne, how high is Dak in the fantasy rankings? Because he is someone kind of on that QB1 borderline where not all that expensive, especially relative to, again, some of the highs he's reached over the years.
Yeah, I've got him as my QB8. I think of him as a pocket passer, to your point, that doesn't have quite the same elite weapons as pocket passers I have in front of him. So I've got Burrow 1 spot ahead of him. I've got CJ Stroud 2 spots ahead of him. Mahomes scrambles a little bit more than Dak, but I mean, still more of a pocket passer, but now gets all his weapons back. Obviously, Mahomes is Mahomes. So I have him behind all those guys. And I also have Anthony Richardson, who gives you that rushing upside ahead of Dak. But it is hard because this is a guy that, to your point, no matter what the supporting cast has really looked like over the last 4 to 5 seasons, he's been pretty good in fantasy, and he has shown that he has a ceiling as well. So I think Dak deserves to be in the top 10, but if anywhere you want to put him between 8, 9, and 10, I think that's really up to you, and I'm fine.
Now, aside from Dak Prescott, the real superstar in this Cowboys offense is the latest number 88. Of course, we're talking about Ceedee Lamb, the reigning, defending, undisputed wide receiver 1 of fantasy football. Dwayne, I know you've been in these early best ball streets just like I have, man. And while Christian McCaffrey does have the 101 ADP, you will see quite often Ceedee actually be the first pick off the board. So for you, Dwayne, let's go ahead and say you're only entering 1 fantasy league this year, which is hilarious to think about only being in 1 fantasy league. But that's a reality for many of you fine folks out there. CMC or Ceedee Lamb with the 101, Dwayne, full PPR. Who do you got?
I'm going Ceedee Lamb. Just because, I mean, he's in his absolute prime. He's going to be 24 years old this season. I mean, he's right in the middle of when wide receivers have their best years. He's already shown us that he can do it. We already talked about the lack of other weapons. Well, that's only good for a high-end target earner like Ceedee Lamb. So if I could only have one draft, it would be Ceedee Lamb. And I've been taking Ceedee occasionally over CMC. Now I've had more of the pick 1 than the pick 2. So I kind of started forcing it a little bit because I just want to take Lamb. And I left it up to Zoe, my daughter. We were on our trip down to Florida. And last week I had the first pick and I took CMC. The very next draft, I got pick 1 again. And I told Zoe, you want Lamb or are we going back to CMC? And she said Lamb. So I happily went with it, Ian.
I know, man. Sometimes with those early picks, though, I just want to get almost different just for the sake of doing so. Because how many 101 drafts are just only starting with CMC or Ceedee? I'm not gonna lie, Dwayne. I threw Bijan in there once, and it felt kind of good to mix things up a little bit. As much as I do understand one draft, yes, I'm with you. Give me Ceedee or CMC. Personally, I lean a little bit more towards CMC, but again, trying to beat hundreds of thousands of other entries, maybe gotta get a little bit contrarian out there. But I think the main point that you made, Dwayne, that holds true here is just the lack of competition in a great offense with a quarterback and just the workload and the talent. Like if we are just, again, basing most wide receiver profiles on those 4 boxes, how good is this player? How good is their opportunity? How good is their quarterback? And what is the actual level of target competition around them? That's where Ceedee stands out from guys like Tyreek Hill, who has to deal with Jalen Waddle, like Justin Jefferson, who has to deal with J.J. McCarthy, or God forbid, Sam Darnold. Jamar Chase has his T. Higgins. I mean, it really is unmatched around the league. And accordingly, we saw Ceedee go 13 straight games and counting with at least 100 yards or a touchdown. So, Dwayne, right now, your fantastic projections can be found for free at fantasylife.com. And it really does seem hard to find someone set to see more raw opportunity than Ceedee Lamb.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a guy that's probably going to have a 30% target share in. I think he's a near lock for 150 plus targets. He's a guy that they move all over the formation. They'll put him in the slot. They keep him in motion. He doesn't
running back sometimes. They get a couple snaps
in the backfield, and maybe more than ever this year, considering that now Pollard is gone. They give him design looks behind the line of scrimmage. 10% of his looks came behind the line of scrimmage. He's a great yak player still at this age, but he can also get deep on you. So yeah, Ceedee Lamb, he gets the perfect utilization profile. You named it. Those are the 4 boxes that we want to check, and he checks them better than anyone else. And if you throw in a 5th box of being age, he's still in his absolute prime.
Wide receivers with at least 5 games with 25 plus PPR points last season. Mike Evans had 5, Ceedee Lamb 8, and Tyreek Hill with 9. So again, floor certainly high enough for Ceedee, but make no mistake about it, this dude has week winning upside. Tough to pass up in the first 2 picks of fantasy drafts. So again, that's Dak, that's Ceedee, but beyond that, Dwayne, it is a bit thin on this roster. Michael Gallup left, and let's face it, coming back from that ACL injury, just hadn't quite looked like the same guy over the past 2 years. So I'm not going to sit here and say the Cowboys need to bring back Michael Gallup, but it was surprising to me to see a team with an alleged all-in approach go through the draft, go through free agency, and just add 0 extra competition to this wide receiver room. So Brandon Cooks, I believe will be 31 years of age here for the season. Jalen Tolbert, former 3rd-round pick, who flashed a couple times last year, but I mean, using flash there is probably even a bit of an overstatement on my part. I mean, what do you make of the rest of this wide receiver room, Dwayne? Because again, if we're expecting Dak to more or less keep on keeping on, yes, he's going to get his. We'll talk about Jake Ferguson later, but you would like to think the NFL's reigning number 1 ranked scoring offense could enable more than one fantasy-friendly wide receiver.
Yeah, and I don't think that we can be certain about any of them. We'll talk about, Ferguson here in a little bit. I think that's my next favorite, but just looking at the wide receivers on the team, Brandon Cook's going to be 31 years old, so he's squarely in that range where we see wide receivers just fall off the cliff, especially guys that have been more of his profile, more of a wide receiver 2 than an elite wide receiver 1 over his career. Yeah, he's jumped in the wide receiver 1 conversation a couple of times, but it really does look like he is in decline. 1.25 yards per route run last season. If you look what he did against man coverage, that was really bad as well, which is often a tell to us that, okay, this guy might not be able to hold up anymore. He and Dak, they made some sweet plays, down the field. Brandon Cooks did score some touchdowns, but it's hard to get too excited. I think he is locked in as the wide receiver 2, but that's only because the other guy you mentioned, Jalen Tolbert, like has absolutely shown us nothing so far. You know, they tried to get him on the field a little bit more last year. He did start to get more work as the season progressed at the end of last season, but he didn't really show us that much. I mean, Ian, it doesn't get much worse than this when you look at his targets per route run of 13%. Not good, guys. Look at his targets per route run against zone coverage, which you're going to face the most in the league, only 11%. And then if you look at his, you know, just his overall body of work, really it was all dependent on deep shots down the field where 23% of his targets came from. So he's got to be someone that can really work more of the route tree to turn into something better. Now, we have heard the rumors out of mini camps, and it's really mostly other players on the team saying, hey, this guy's really going to be improved. He's really worked on the entire route tree. So if those things can come true, I mean, then Tolbert maybe has a chance. You can take him in the very last round of best ball drafts right now. So like if you build a Dallas team and you're sitting there with your last pick, you're like, oh, what do I do? And you've got Dak Prescott. That's fine. That's whenever I'm willing to take Tolbert. But in most redraft leagues, folks that are going to be listening to this, Tolbert would be a waiver wire guy.
Actually, last draft I did before getting on here today, drafted Tolbert as a bring back for my lovely Philadelphia Eagles stack. So you're right. Round 18, very last round, not a late round pick, the last round pick. Jalen Tolbert could be there for you. But Dwayne, I thought you were actually going to say with the, word out of minicamp that, potential new slot receiver here, 5'3", Deuce Vaughn, apparently, the latest running back to be getting extra work out of the slot. Just an absolute joke there. So with Brandon Cooks, again, I do tend to agree where didn't see, the usual version of him. He wasn't shooting as many arrows, I would say, after making big plays last season. 9-year low in yards per reception at just 12.2. And he really did emerge as one of the more touchdown dependent wide receivers in all of fantasy football. I mean, in terms of the top 50 fantasy wide receivers, who was the most reliant on touchdowns for their production, it was Cortland Sutton, number 1. It was Dwayne's guy, Christian Watson, number 2. And in third was Brandon Cooks. I mean, a ton of those, flag routes, in the red zone that him and Dak were able to hook up with. So honestly, looking at some more of the first read targets specifically, even last year, I mean, Tolbert and Gallup actually combined for more than Cooks. Ceedee was obviously in first, and even Jake Ferguson was in second place ahead of Brandon Cooks. So that's the problem here, Dwayne. I mean, Cooks had fewer than 5 or fewer targets in 11 of 17 games last season. So as much as you would almost think on the surface, yeah, okay, subtracting Gallup's going to result in this big spike for Cooks, especially a man at his age, just don't see it. Probably more of a positive for Jake Ferguson. I mean, do you think we just see more 2 tight end sets? Is that the answer here?
I think there's potential for that. I mean, I think Brandon Cooks is going to be on the field a lot. It's just the fact that he does look like he's already started to really, take a turn for the worse as far as his career. We occasionally see these guys that we say this about, though. Remember a couple of years ago, people were like, oh, look at Keenan Allen, yards per route are down, targets per route are down. All these things were down. Now, they weren't down in the level that Brandon Cooks is at, right, but then he turned around and bounced back, and he was really good. So I think Cooks is going to be out there. I think he's fine as a wide receiver 5 on your team, probably still going to give you some spike weeks. Maybe there's a little upside there, but at his age, he could just completely fall off a cliff. I do think Ferguson is the guy that we really want to be targeting as the number 2 pass catcher in the offense.
Cook's current ADP over Underdog Fantasy, wide receiver 59, pick 120. So he's going after the top 14 quarterbacks, top 36 running backs. So we're not trying to bash, just a pretty late mid-round pick, too much. But yes, certainly is a bit of a scary floor for any aging wide receiver, especially again when we have some of those underlying metrics not moving in the right direction like they were with Cook. So those were our 3 most interesting things about the Cowboys. But now I want to talk about, just the overall offensive philosophy going on, as Dwayne likes to publish every single week. His critically acclaimed utilization report goes through exactly what these teams and offenses are doing in terms of their pass run rate, early down usage, third down usage, all that stuff and much, much more. So Dwayne, I know last year there's a lot of concern with Brian Schottenheimer taking over for Kellen Moore about this becoming a super run heavy offense, but wasn't exactly the case as the season went on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you had a 3% drop back rate over expectation. That was 7th in the NFL last season. So they were a little more balanced than some of the seasons that we had seen with Kellen Moore before, but it was still a pass-friendly team. And again, looking at the offense that they had last year, was it really, I know you talked about this is maybe the worst since 2018, but was last year's offense really that much better than this as far as the weapons? And then when I look at the backfield, look at the backs, I think it's going to be a similar approach this year. I think they're going to lean slightly towards throwing the ball more than running the ball. So I think that we're pretty much going to see a team that's going to be status quo to last year. I've got them projected for roughly the same passing yards per game, a little bit less on the rushing yards per game than where they were last year, but everything's pretty close.
Again, if you do want to ride with the, supporting cast being at a 5-year low argument, I think the main point has to be that offensive line. PFF's running 8th ranked group was a solid, last year. And again, maybe they could be moving forward, but they are only returning 3 of 5 starters. We will see if, the perennial all-pro Zach Martin can make up for, again, a potential loss in overall depth there across.
He'll be 33 this season. He'll turn 33 in the season. So actually he might be 34 in the season. I think he turns 34 in the season. Yeah.
Can't say I've been grinding the age curves of offensive linemen all that much over the years, Dwayne, but hey, I would like to think that, younger, probably better across the position. So before we get into a couple position battles, let's go ahead and talk actually about the overall team outlook. Their win total is resting at 10.5 plus 105, on the over, minus 125 there on the under. To win division there, plus 130. Second place to the Eagles. So we are seeing Philly be the slight favorite, which, hey man, just based on history, makes sense. The NFC East has not seen a repeat divisional champ since the 2003-2004 Eagles. Dwayne, do you think the Cowboys can buck the trend?
I mean, we'll see. It's been, pretty much the Eagles and Cowboys starting in 14. It's Dallas, Washington crept in. It's Dallas, Eagles, Washington crept in 2020. Then it was Cowboys, Eagles, Cowboys.
Poor
so
Giants.
it feels like it's the Eagles. Based on this, this feels like a really strong trend. I still think the division comes down to those two teams. But I think Washington might have gotten a little better. They changed up their head coaching staff as well. You had Jaden Daniels. You talk about, the Giants. They can't be worse. They'll get Daniel Jones back in the lineup. Not that he's great. They had Malik Neighbors. So I think those other two teams are still lower than the Cowboys and the Eagles, but they could be slightly more competition. Then if you look at the out of division schedule, it's not terrible. AFC North is not great. You're going to play Cincinnati, Baltimore, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. Those could all be tough games, but you get the NFC South, Carolina, Tampa Bay, New Orleans, Atlanta. One of those teams will probably surprise us and be better than we think, but those are all winnable games. And if you look at the Cowboys, man, that 10.5 line. So in 2023, the line was set at 9.5. They won 11 games. So they beat it. In 2022, the Vegas line was 10.5. They won 12 games. 2021, the Vegas line was 9.5. They won 12 games. So they've beat this line the last 3 seasons. Why, Ian, do I feel so bad saying that I would take the over? Because if I had to bet it, Girl Scout sauntering to the door right now, making me choose switchblade to my neck, my mortgage is on it. I think I'm still taking the under 10.5. I don't know. It still feels high.
I am with you taking the under on 10.5. Again, I've gone through my team preview series, forced myself to pick all these lines. This is far from, the one I'm most confident about or anything like that. But again, to get through free agency, to get through the draft, to not do any meaningful trades throughout the entire offseason, we're literally just running back a lesser version of the 2023 roster and hoping that an extra year in the system and having Mike Zimmer, take over the defense is going to make all the difference in the world. So, hey, to be fair, they could lose an extra game than they did last year and still finish above this line. But again, just feels to me like this all-in approach, Mike McCarthy kind of on his last stand here as a head coach, just very concerned about this potentially being a bottoming out situation for the franchise. So of course, though, still, some potential fantasy contributors we got to get to. First, I want to give a shout out to our friends over at DraftKings because, guys, hot UFC card coming up this weekend. Honestly, my second favorite sport, MMA, UFC. I understand there's a difference there, but behind football, UFC 303 is bringing the Octagon back to Vegas, and I can say this, you do not want to miss out on any of the action with our partners at DraftKings Sportsbook, the official sports betting partner of UFC. Maybe no Conor McGregor, but guys, seriously, Alex Pereira versus Yuri Prochazka, that is going to be a far better fight. Absolute banger. Ian Gary versus MVP, and we even got freaking Lopez versus Ortega added to the card. Absolutely fantastic night. Truly a banger of the card with fire matchups all set to take place in the Octagon. And hey, if you're new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers who bet just $5 will get $150 in bonus bets instantly. All you got to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use our code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. Side note, not too many Russians on this card, but Dwayne, one of my best strategies, man, over the years now, if the fighter's last name ends in Ov, I'm betting him. I'm doing it. And guess what? It usually works.
Proven.
So keep that one in mind, everybody. But again, mention still have a couple more situations we want to talk about here because Dwayne, for the first time in a while, there's a legit position battle in this backfield. Our man, I don't want to say our man, but the third leading rusher in Cowboys history, Ezekiel Elliott, is back in action, but Rico Dowdle is still here as RB2. We also have pint-sized slot receiver / running back Deuce Vaughn, and, massive free agent addition here in Royce Freeman. So what do you make of this position battle, Dwayne? Because, again, we've seen Dak and company lead this high-scoring offense. You would like to think whoever is going to work their way at 200-plus touches can give us some nice fantasy value.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a committee. It's a matter of, is it going to be 2 backs or is it going to be 3 backs? Dowdle surprisingly did some nice things last year on passing downs. They would bring Tony Pollard off the field, the guy we thought was really good on passing downs, and they would sneak Dowdle out there, especially for screen type situations. So they're pretty comfortable getting him out there. I will say I think if I have to pick, I think ADP right now is right, and it slightly has Zeke ahead. My take on this backfield is I'm drafting a lot of teams. So I'm mixing it up. I'm taking some Zeke. I'm taking some Dowdle. Like if you just made me pick, I know a lot of people are like, give me Dowdle because he's cheaper. He's younger. I think I still slightly lean to Zeke. We saw last year with Ramondre Stevenson out of the lineup, RB15, RB1, RB25, RB19, 16 fantasy points per game. I get it, guys. The efficiency was so gross that I'm not even going to name any of it to you because it'll just make you vomit all over yourself right now riding in your car. We don't want that for you guys. But the bottom line is, and the research that I've done, the most sticky thing year over year for running backs, it's actually the volume. It's not even the efficiency. And Zeke's just a guy that's shown he can be out there on all the downs. Coaches trust him. The Cowboys brought him back. Yeah, it's not for a lot of money. But Rico Dowdle, he's a 26-year-old dude that's really done nothing. And it's not like he was super efficient last year. He had some nice plays. But if I had to pick, I would lean to Zeke. So I think the ADP is right now. But I think the strategy is if you're going to draft a bunch of teams, especially in best ball, you should be mixing these guys in because what if we still have a top 5 scoring offense, Ian, and one of these guys does manage to take over or the other gets hurt? Even if they're not good, they're going to score fantasy points.
That's what happened the last time Zeke was in Dallas. It was horrible in 2022. He averaged 3.8 yards per carry. Tony Pollard took almost all the pass down work. Like that was by far the most split backfield we ever saw with Zeke. And he finished as a PPR RB22 because he scored a freaking 12 touchdowns, 9 of which were from inside the 5-yard line. So, yeah, man, again, right now in Underdog Fantasy, the RB39, pick 127. Yeah, Zeke's efficiency sucks. Guess what? Even last year on a dead-in-the-water Patriots offense, Zeke had better efficiency than Josh Jacobs. He forced the same amount of missed tackles as Saquon Barkley. Who would I take this year? Yeah, give me Jacobs and Barkley. The money matters. The fact that Barkley's a year younger, that Jacobs is 2 years younger, it matters. But we're talking about like 100-plus pick difference between Zeke and Saquon right now. So again, not trying to make it, Zeke versus Saquon specifically, but it's an offense where over the past 3 seasons, 4th most carries by running backs inside the 5-yard line. Hey man, again, we just need Zeke to fall into that end zone double-digit times in order to smash this ADP, and I think he has a chance to do so. So that's where we're at with Zeke. Do you think Dowdle is a decent enough handcuff play, Dwayne? He's certainly gotten more expensive, and as much as we haven't seen a ton from him, he did flash a little bit as a receiver last year. Top 10 marks in the position in terms of yard per reception and yards per route run.
Yeah, and those data points typically just aren't very sticky for running backs, especially on a smaller sample, so it's hard to say. But, we saw it last year. We saw the flashes. They were willing to put him on the field. I don't necessarily think of him as a handcuff. I think of this almost right now. I'm treating it more as a 1A, 1B with a slight lean to Zeke. So yeah, I'm still definitely drafting Dowdle. If I miss, on Zeke and I'm in a build where I really need the running back, I'm fine circling back around to Dowdle the next round. So I've been forcing myself to really take both of these guys. I have slightly more Zeke right now. But I do think there is a chance that we see more passes to the running backs this year than what we've seen in a long time, because you just mentioned, like outside of Ceedee Lamb, like we have question marks. So we're about to talk about Ferguson, so I like him. But if that doesn't work out, the running backs could really be the second most targeted position on the team. And last year, Zeke, we saw it in a similar situation in New England where they didn't really have a good wide receiver outside of Pop Douglas. The dude had a 29% targets per route run in games without Ramondre Stevenson. So anytime you don't have guys demanding targets down the field, you're more likely to get design looks behind the line of scrimmage. Zeke's not going to burn a linebacker on a Texas route. And, I know we would love for him to, but they will scheme things up. And if you go to look for Ceedee Lamb and he's double covered, you're much more likely to end up on a check down when you don't have a solid wide receiver too. And that's usually going to the running back.
Moral of the story, in terms of just raw touch projection versus ADP, Zeke's looking like one of the cheaper options out there. And just be careful, guys, about overly counting, a lack of efficiency against Zeke relative to some of these other running backs. Hey, shocking, but true. In terms
of he could be a running back 1 this year. Zeke could legit be a running back 10, 11. I know people are going to hear this and they're going to laugh. Remember, volume is king, and he plays on a good team, and you mentioned it. If the touchdowns come and he somehow gets more work in the passing game, man, Zeke's going to – at a minimum, I think Zeke's going to really beat this ADP anyway. It's just by a matter of how much.
And hey, fun fact, everyone, fastest top speed last year with the football in their hands. Zeke beat Pollard. Zeke beat Josh Jacobs. Don't shoot the messenger. That happened. All right, final guy we want to talk about in this offense. We've mentioned his name already, but ASAP Ferg himself, Jake Ferguson, really fun player to watch, Dwayne. Now, I agree. I don't think he's that much more talented or, even better than Dalton Schultz. Happened to get me in a bit of trouble with some of my fantasy takes last year, but a lot of fun to watch. I mean, just the alpha performance he had against the Seahawks was great. The lone bright spot in that otherwise just humiliating playoff loss to the Packers. I mean, we're talking about the reigning tight end 10 in PPR points per game. And if you do want to give him the benefit of, again, having such a great game in the playoffs, take every player's, playoff production included, actually would have been the tight end 8 last season. So looking at fantasy life projections, Dwayne, you only have Trey McBride, Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta, Evan Ingram, Dalton Kincaid, Mark Andrews, and Kyle Pitts projected for more targets than Jake Ferguson. So again, pretty tough. And I don't think people are going to overly disagree with, the top 10 ranking there. But do you think Ferguson has a chance to go from this borderline tight end 1 to someone we actually see slipping into positions top 5?
Yeah, I think there's potential for it, because everything's not necessarily static. It's still a young player. He already has the profile of a low end to mid range tight end 1. So, I mean, if you look at his target share ability with the playoff game included last year, which I'm glad you did that, Ian, because when we have the extra data point, why not take it, people?
And 17%. It's not preseason bullshit. It's the postseason.
Exactly. I get it if you're looking at counting stats and using rankings, but when we're using things around efficiency, target share, things like that, I think you should absolutely include the playoffs. It gives you that extra data point. But Jake Ferguson, 17% target share. That's right there in that mid-range wide tight end 1 range. If you look at his yards per route run, 1.46. If you look at, his air yards per game, all the things that we like to look at, he is a mid-range to low-end tight end 1, but he's also a young player, right? He's only going to be 26 years old in the middle of this. Well, at the beginning of the season, he'll only be 25. So he can still take another step forward. And if he does, it's not out of the range of outcomes that suddenly Jake Ferguson is a top 6 fantasy tight end this season. I've got him in a tier in my ranks with Evan Ingram, with David Njoku, with Brock Bowers, with Dallas Goedert. I think all those guys are tightly grouped together. I think you can make an argument on the talent profile. Bowers is the outlier there. He could be absolutely elite and better than all those guys. But Ferguson could still have some upside left as far as, his talent profile is concerned at his current age. And we like the offense. We just talked about how steady Dak is, and we're not anticipating this offense going nowhere. That likely means an even better season for Jake Ferguson.
Yeah, I mean, Dak has never seen a seam throw that he didn't think he could complete over the years. And guess who gets to benefit from that the most? Jake Ferguson himself. So, yeah, again, pretty clear big 7 in Fantasyland. But after that, Evan Ingram, Jake Ferguson, Brock Bowers, David Njoku, and Dallas Goedert. That's really the last crop of guys I think you can really feel good about slotting into your tight end 1 slot and forgetting about it. Don't discount Ferguson, potentially booming in his second full year as a starter. So before we get out of here, guys, I want to invite you to follow some of the best Cowboys beat writers in the business. Personally, love everything that David Hellman, John Owning, Sports Sturm, John Machado bring to the table. And as always, make sure you guys are following 32 beat writers. They do a great job of not only covering the league, but also just, again, giving credit to the fantastic beat reporters who make all that possible. And also at Coach Speak Index, again, one of the better Twitter accounts that has graced our lovely industry in recent years. So, Dwayne, as we close things out, we're getting a little bit quirky here. Now, you and me do enjoy our TV and movies. Wouldn't exactly call us aficionados, but we like them. And accordingly, we're going to be trying to comp all these teams to a TV or movie character. So, Dwayne, we'll start with you. Comp the 2024 Cowboys to a character of your choice.
Yeah, I'm going with Homelander number one, the show is The Boys. Well, this is The Boys, Ian, so I can go with that. But I feel like Homelander is constantly graced with, he looks around the table and he's like, oh, I guess we're just going to run it back again. Like, I'm the only person here that can do anything. We just got through talking about the Cowboys. And it's Dak Prescott and Ceedee Lamb, and you mentioned it. They didn't go out to do anything else to help them. So I will go with Homelander from The Boys because, conveniently, I'm watching the fourth season right now with Amanda. And so that popped in my head.
I'm on the season 3 finale, so I'll be caught up with you there soon. I love that call. I'm going with Kenny from South Park. It's a main character. You're, constantly seeing him throughout most of the things. But at the end of the day, they're going to die towards the end of almost every episode, or in this case, season. And it's going to be in dramatic fashion. And yet it's just hilariously, uniquely cruel each and every time. Maybe not as much to us, Dwayne, because we are sadly,
Oh, no, especially to me when I'm at the game live, Ian. I'm at this game when it happens every time. I don't know why I keep going back for more punishment, going to see them lose to the Packers in the playoffs.
Again, uniquely cruel for Dwayne and I and the rest of the Cowboys fans out there, but we are self-aware enough to realize how hilarious it must be to hate watch some of these late season fiascos. From the Zeke snap against the Niners to Dak running the QB slide to last year being down 27 points in the second quarter at home to the freaking 7 seed. It has been sad, but hey, new year, maybe, just maybe, new Dallas Cowboys. So again, I want to thank you guys for tuning in to the Fantasy Life podcast. You can check out my Dallas Cowboys team preview at fantasylife.com. Check out Dwayne's projections, our Fantasy Life consensus ranks, all that. Links are in the description. So please subscribe and follow Fantasy Life on YouTube as we get ready for draft season. So for Dwayne, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in to the Fantasy Life podcast. And until next time, take care, everybody.